What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so getting into Edge of Venomverse, this is actually a really cool concept. Now, Edge of Venomverse is actually based on Edge of Spider-Verse, and that was a story written by Dan Slott, which led into the Spider-Verse story. And while Marvel does list this as a 5-part series, they're all basically one-shots. You could read each one of them individually. Now, in truth, it's like reading any crossover event, right? I mean, like, you could read Edge of Venomverse, each story by itself, or you could read issues 2, and then you could read issue 5, and then never read the other 3. But it's better when it's all read together. And the reason why is because despite them being one-shots, they do tell a cohesive story that leads into Venomverse proper. Edge of Spider-Verse dealt with the idea of just these alternate reality versions of Spider-Man. That's actually where Spider-Gwen came from. She was just basically from a reality where Gwen Stacy was bitten by a radioactive spider instead of Peter Parker. There was another universe where Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider and became an actual spider and started killing people. There were some really cool things that went on with those different one-shots and the different variations of characters that we were used to, but this one deals with the idea of X-23 becoming Venom. Now, the reason why I titled it All New Wolverine, or really, just really Wolverine in general, is because of the fact that it's really easy to digest that way. There are more people that recognize the name All New Wolverine as opposed to X-23, but the fact remains, the cool bit about this is that this really kind of harkens back to the origin story of Laura Kinney of X-23, which you'll find down in the description. That was a story called Innocence Lost, but this basically deals with the facility. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that because this is based on the origin of X-23 and because she's currently All New Wolverine, really it just kind of picks up from there, and it doesn't give us a lot of that backstory, and it really doesn't need to. Again, this really just kind of focuses on her escape from the facility, the fact that she did it, or at least she tried to escape 4 other times and failed each time. In each instance, she was basically subdued with a gas of sorts that more or less knocked her out. Now again, the reason why we don't really need this, and to kind of go back to this origin story a little bit, because for the first timers that are new to this, I want to leave you guys hanging. X-23 was basically a female genetic clone of Wolverine, and she was female because of the fact that the DNA of Wolverine had degraded to such a degree that they couldn't make a perfect male clone, and so they made it female instead. And so what ended up happening is X-23 was basically raised to become an assassin. She was sent on missions, and she was very prodigious in terms of her ability to take out any number of people, dignitaries, political officials, different things like that, average men and women. But she was also raised by a woman named Sarah Kinney, I believe it was. And Sarah Kinney was the person that actually gave birth to X-23 in order to allow her to become an assassin and so on. But where the facility trained Laura to be a killer, Sarah tried to counteract that by teaching her humanity, by trying to help her become a human being. Now, of course, it didn't work right off the bat. She had been so mistreated and really been stripped of her humanity on such a deep level that even after her escape from the facility, she basically, her stories went on to see her kind of trying to regain her humanity, getting back in touch with Wolverine, different things like that. But this again really hits home at that. The difference here is that Sarah is nowhere to be found in the story. And so the implication here is that perhaps the cloning process was successful insofar as they didn't need Sarah Kinney, and instead she was basically grown in a tube and then became a killer. But the overall gist is the same. Laura does not want to be an assassin. She does not want to be confined to this life of being made to kill time and time again. And so what ends up happening is in the middle of all this entire scenario, she actually ends up coming across the Venom Symbiote. Now again, this is an alternate reality story, and so things that basically play out entirely different from what we're used to. The reason why I say that is because of the fact that originally in Marvel Comics, the Venom Symbiote was actually an alien life form that was picked up by Peter Parker during the events of the first Secret Wars back in 1984 or 1985, and it basically allowed Marvel to move his character forward by endowing him with a multitude of new abilities. Now, of course, those stories basically unfolded with Peter Parker realizing that the costume that he was wearing was sentient, it did have a mind of its own, and it led him down a much darker path. And of course, after Peter Parker cast the symbiote aside, it eventually bonded to Eddie Brock and became Venom, the character that we're so familiar with. But the overall idea here is that because this is a different reality, we don't know where this Venom symbiote came from. We don't know if it was biologically engineered, if it was created by the facility. We don't really know where it came from. All we know is that where X-23 is trying to get away from these guards in the facility, she ultimately ends up puncturing this tube and is basically bonded with the symbiote, after which she just starts wrecking all these different soldiers, basically killing them all off. Now, at this point, we actually jump forward by a couple months back to X-23's first original introduction into Marvel Comics, just by way of some of the characters like Zebra Daddy, for example, and we'll get into him here in a second. But one thing I want to point out here is back when X-23 was originally created, she was more or less made by Craig Kyle and Chris Yost, and she really made her debut in X-Men Evolution. But because she was so popular, Marvel eventually rolled her over into Marvel Comics. But they didn't necessarily do this with the origin story Innocence Lost. Instead, what they did is they created, or at least tied her into, an existing story called NYX. And NYX dealt with the first, again, comic book appearance of X-23, and it was the idea that Laura was basically living as an underage prostitute in New York, and she was working for a guy named Zebra Daddy. Of course, NYX in and of itself was a pretty adult-oriented comic. I mean, it wasn't anything gratuitous. Marvel still has a measure of propriety. It's not like Punisher Max with the Slaver story, which is absolutely insane. But the fact remains here, the character of Zebra Daddy, teenagers who were kind of castaways, that's all basically rooted in the original NYX story. The whole idea of those characters is that they were basically, or at least X-23 was essentially a mutant living in New York City, trying to make her way. And a lot of the kids who were cast-offs, a lot of the kids who didn't really have a home for themselves, they made their way on the streets doing whatever it was they needed to do to survive. And in this instance, it actually picks up with 3 kids who end up going into this derelict bank. Now, the other half of this is that it very much draws on the existing concept of Venom in Marvel Comics. And the reason why I say that is because, as far as I'm aware, historically speaking, Venom wasn't really an entity that spoke directly with its host. Instead, the host would say things like we or us, and it would speak as if there were multiple personalities in there. It would basically reference both itself and the host that the symbiote was bonded to. But for the most part, I'm not really aware of an instance when the symbiote would speak directly to its host. That may very well be something that was there. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm the most wildly knowledgeable person when it comes to Venom. That's really more of a question for like Sal at Comic Pop, to be honest. But the fact remains that in this instance, the familiarity of the Venom symbiote talking to its host is rolled over in the sense that when these kids show up inside of this building, the Venom symbiote initially wants to kill them, and it actually wants to consume them. It wants to eat them, which is kind of messed up. But it's also sort of interesting because X-23 basically runs them off. Now, again, this is all rooted in the origin of X-23 and the origin of Laura Kinney. The fact that she's not really human, the fact that she, doesn't really have that human element that allows her to develop social skills. Instead, she basically views the symbiote as the only real thing that she needs. But the other half of this is that, much like the actual main Marvel comic stories, she yearns to basically have human contact. She wants to have a family of sorts, or at the very least, she wants to have friends. And so what ends up happening here is where she and the Venom symbiote kind of go back and forth over whether or not these kids should be killed. They ultimately end up taking off due to the fact that they think that X-23 is essentially running them out, where they end up running into Zebra Daddy. Now again, Zebra Daddy, of course, being the pimp from NYX, the guy who was basically running the show with regards to X-23. And the idea here is that these kids just owe him money. Now, I mean, this is not wildly important. It's not a great big huge talking point. What ends up happening with Zebra Daddy is kind of important, but for the most part, it really just allows the common ground. It allows the instance for X-23 to sort of just pop up and then kill one of the hired thugs of Zebra Daddy and in turn save these kids. Now, of course, that's exactly what happens. I mean, she just kind of rips all these guys up. But then again, we jump back to the idea of the facility. Now, remember, we're not given any names here, so we don't know if this is Xander Rice, the guy from the original X-23 origin story, Innocence Lost, who was one of the people that spearheaded the cloning process of her in the first place. And so, again, we're just kind of told facility people are looking for X-23, and by extension, the Venom symbiote basically says anybody that you come across and anybody that you make friends with is going to be in mortal danger because the facility will do whatever they have to and kill whoever they have to in order to get you back. Also remember, if the facility in this story, this alternate reality story, is anything like the facility in the main Marvel universe, then it's basically the idea that there can be no witnesses. Nobody can be aware of what it is that they're doing. So that really creates even more of an incentive for the facility to kill these various kids. And so something that I hope you notice here is this actually gives us a reason to see these individuals paired together, if for no reason other than the fact that X-23 serves as their protector of sorts. And this really comes to a head a few weeks after Zebra Daddy basically points the finger at X-23, says that's the girl that attacked me, and is killed by the facility member, when we end up finding out that X-23 essentially serves as both the protector as well as a helping hand with regards to these kids. And so what she actually does is just basically distract a guy in an ice cream truck. And one of the kids punches her in the nose. She goes walking up to the guy in the ice cream truck, says, look, I'm bleeding all over the place. Can you help me out? A couple of the kids grab boxes and they take off. But again, in this particular instance, the facility is always watching. The facility is always aware of what's going on, because remember, while the facility is in and of itself a private entity, which is to say it's not beholden to any governmental institution, it does have ties to various governments. And so it means that it does have the ability to have eyes and ears all throughout virtually any city. This is also combined with the fact that rumors going to spread, and eventually stories are going to spread about some person, you know, that looks kind of crazy and is dressed in black and has claws. That's basically ripping things up in, you know, downtown New York if anybody comes too close to their turf. And so really just by kind of putting their ear to the ground and listening to the rumors and so on and so forth, it was only a matter of time before they caught up with X-23. But the cool thing about this is that because Laura views these kids as her friends, the symbiote by extension protects them as well. And so what this means is that these kids have basically been given a Venom symbiote of their own. Now it's not full on, right? Like, I mean, it's not a full on Venom symbiote. It's just a small little portion of the symbiote itself. And so it allows them to basically escape whatever particular situation they're in, but they're not nearly as powerful or as capable as X-23. Now, the other half of this is how easy it is for a person to get carried away with the Venom symbiote. And that really goes back to Brian Michael Bendis' story in Guardians of the Galaxy that gave us the whole origin of the symbiotes and the Planet of the Symbiote story and all that kind of good stuff, you know, and the whole idea of Lee Price, I think it is, with regards to Marvel Now 2.0, the Venom, the 6-part Venom story that we got before the Legacy renumbering that saw it jump up to issue number 150, and the return of Eddie Brock. The idea that the Venom symbiote is, again, very sentient. It has its own mind, it has its own desires, and where the Venom symbiote so far in Marvel Comics and Marvel Now as part of All New, All Different Marvel had looked to basically make itself a good guy, had looked to, you know, essentially make up for its past misdeeds when it was bonded to Eddie Brock. In this universe, that does not seem to be the case. Instead, the Venom symbiote just wants to destroy stuff. It just wants to eat people, you know, and just be a bad guy. Now, of course, with the various agents of the facility eventually tracking these kids down, taking them prisoner, they're able to use their aspects of the Venom symbiote to fight off the members of the facility. Of course, it also sees the arrival of X-23, but something else that I also hope you notice here is that over the course of this story, the more that Laura has begun to bond with the symbiote, the more that she becomes essentially like a symbiote version of Wolverine. And so again, it's kind of cool because her physical appearance begins to change. She begins to don yellow more so than she did before. She gets the large eyes. She gets the face thing, that black face thing. I don't know how else to describe it. I guess a mask of sorts. You know, she basically becomes this venomized version of Wolverine that we're so familiar with in Marvel Comics. And so following this, it's really just kind of tearing up these different members of the facility, you know, these different soldiers. Of course, fire is still very much a weakness of the symbiotes. And so where one of these guys uses a flamethrower and ultimately Laura is able to make a last second escape into this sort of holding room, what ends up happening is that the Venom symbiote actually recalls its smaller aspects from these other kids and directly into Laura, after which it's whisked away into a void of sorts. Now, we don't really know what's going on with this. I mean, again, this will probably be covered in some other set of events or something along those lines. Maybe it'll be continued in parts 2, 3, 4, and 5. But Laura Kinney basically comes back almost immediately after she had vanished. And of course, the question is, well, what happened to her friends? Where'd they go? Did somebody take them? So on and so forth. But before any of the questions can actually be answered, she's met by the arrival of a venomized version of Captain America. So again, it's a really cool concept. It's a really cool idea here, and I really like the way this is going because it's extremely good. So it's a really cool concept. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.